Hello everyone, my name is Rich Pearson. I'm a professional counsellor and psychotherapist based in Falmouth in Cornwall, and today we're going to be talking about boundaries. In terms of either our personal or professional life or any other thing that involves a person, boundaries are the limits of essentially what we can tolerate that we've put in place. Now, a lot of people may not come across boundaries in their personal life, but they may be more familiar with them in their work life. We have boundaries that dictate how much a person should get paid, or the minimum amount that a person should get paid is. We have boundaries that exist kind of like laws that say how long a person can go to work for and how dangerous a circumstance they can be in to legally call it work. In our personal lives though, people may be more unfamiliar with setting boundaries. How do you set a boundary with your friends or your parents or your spouse or your children or anything else like that? But boundaries are one of the things that come up time and again with many of the clients that I have, and in much of the work that I did in terms of learning how to be a therapist. Boundaries are important because they essentially act as agreements, and one of the most interesting things that I often find in counselling is that a lot of people assume that everyone else is aware of their boundaries, because a lot of people take their own lived experience as gospel for pretty much the rest of the human race. So it's really interesting when you try and sit down with someone and say, well, have you ever told someone that that thing upsets you? Boundaries are important for our personal lives. They are essentially mini laws which we put in place and which hopefully we, if there's more than one person in a given situation, agree on. Whenever we start any kind of counselling relationship, we'll do what's called a contract, and there'll be a whole video on that coming later. But essentially, in the contract, we put various different boundaries in place. Now, one of the most common ones that we put in is regarding time. So we say to people, we both agree, the counsellor and the client, that we will show up on time for this. And again, this comes to be more like a work boundary than anything else. But again, an example of boundaries in your personal life might be if you're in a cohabiting situation with either a romantic partner or a housemate or anything else, you set a boundary that says it's your turn to take the bins out. And you don't just assume that someone else is going to do it. Or it's your turn to cook, it's your turn to walk the dog, it's your turn to change the baby, anything like that. Having a structure in place is one of the best things that you can do. If you feel like there's disruption in your life, one of the first things to do, in a sense, is to look at where do you feel like boundaries are being crossed. Because it's almost always with other people. But anytime during your life that you feel like things aren't going the way that they're supposed to be going, or you feel like you've been disrespected, or you feel like a line has been crossed somewhere, anywhere, the first thing to do is to ask yourself, how important is this thing? Because many of the boundaries that we put in place in our own heads that we don't tell other people about are simply things that we've inherited from our parents. Some people may inherit a boundary from their parents that suggests that you should only do certain things on certain days of the week. So when you feel disrupted in something, when you feel like someone has crossed a line with you, the first thing to do is ask yourself, how important is that line? And it's not a trick question, because a lot of the time it'll be really important. Say you go out for a few drinks with someone and you've driven to the place, and the person who's supposed to be driving you home has more drinks than you are comfortable with them driving a car. It's not unreasonable of you to say to them, I don't feel safe getting into a car with you now. You've crossed a boundary of what I think of as moral, ethical, and just safe. That's a boundary that a lot of people will potentially let slide because they don't want to upset the other person, in a sense crossing the other person's boundary, which is that they don't want to be demonized for what they consider to be reasonable behavior, even though I would hope most people would say that was quite a reckless thing to do. One of the things that I come across a lot in terms of therapy and boundaries is young people, especially young adults, who are still having trouble with getting their parents to treat them as adults, to not respect the boundaries that they themselves have put in place. I mean, I don't work with anyone under the age of 18 at the moment, but it's a thing that's even more important, or equally as important, when you're talking about young children, because young children have boundaries as well. One of the most common things that we're starting to see now is people discussing more about how we should respect children in terms of sexual behaviour, which is to say, a parent going to a child and saying, "Give me a kiss." That sets up potentially a really toxic, difficult boundary in terms of that child understanding their autonomy in terms of what they do and don't want to happen to themselves. This is something which might sound almost trivial to some people, but autonomy is a really important thing, and children at a very young age will take on board the boundaries that their parents impose upon them, or that other strong influences around them will impose upon them. So it is worthy of discussion to say whether we shouldn't allow children to have more autonomy in terms of things like that. I'm not saying you should give them the keys to the Range Rover and let them go and do whatever they want. That's, a bit more different. But being able to respect their boundaries, if they don't want to kiss, if they don't want to hug, if they don't want to play, if anything like that, there's a balance to things. And it's much like my previous video on simplicity, it's unfortunately not a simple answer. But in terms of what you as an individual can do to help improve your life a little bit, is to be mindful of your own boundaries and other people's as well. If you're in a situation where you are in a crowded place, it's really important to be mindful. Some people, I've been to lots of big concerts and festivals and stuff, and it's sort of a given that your personal space gets invaded by people quite a lot, because you're in a crowd of 10,000 people and everyone's pushing around you and stuff. But I've been there with groups of people, and some people have said, "Yeah, let's go to the front," and other people have gone, "No, I think I'm going to stay here at the back," because they've learned that their boundaries can't withstand being crossed in that way. I myself am a neurodiverse person. I have autism, so sometimes I really struggle being in big crowded places and stuff, and it makes me really uncomfortable. Other times I don't mind it, so my boundary there can actually be a little bit fluid and depends on how I'm feeling. It's important to assess these things. It's important to be consistent with boundaries, but it's also important to know that change is inevitable.